Welcome to our podcast, Marriage, a Journey of Grace, Truth, and Time, as we continue our conversation this season about the sacred design of sex. And today we're going to talk, Teresa, about knowing and being known, the dance of desire. And our big idea for this episode is this: true sexual intimacy invites couples into the courage of being fully known through desire, difference, and vulnerability. Now, we've spoken a little bit about vulnerability, but it's so key here. Let's just double click on that for a moment. One of the vulnerabilities.
I think we're going to come back to that vulnerability thing probably in each time we talk about this, because it is the thing.
It is the thing. It reminds me when I first started counseling with my counselor Harv a few years ago. I said to him, I said, I don't mind being vulnerable. I just don't like that feeling that I'm not safe and I'm at risk. And he literally started laughing. He said, well, that's actually what vulnerability feels like. I'm like, yeah. Oh, darn. Well, I don't actually want to feel that, right? But you're saying, yeah, actually that is where we're going to go. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's challenging because if what we most want is to be seen, known, and then loved and accepted for who we are, then of course our greatest fear is going to be that doesn't happen. And sex seems to be a place where that's at risk of not happening. This tension just seems like it would show up really strongly, particularly because of the effect of the fall in the broken world of blame and shame and hiddenness. And so, but as we start to talk about desire and differences, how do we look at those things and in their relationship to being vulnerable?
Well, one of the things I kind of want to backtrack just a little bit, because when you say we all want to be safe and seen, you're talking, that's attachment language, which is safe, seen, and soothed. Okay. Every person needs that in order to feel secure in a relationship. And sex, as God intended, is to be born out of that level of security and safety in a relationship. So it
both creates it and reinforces it.
Absolutely, it does. And so in the absence of those things, you are not going to have a healthy sex life. It's not going to happen. And so that's where getting into that vulnerability and those layers become really important. So then go back to your question. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I think you did a great job. It's because it sets us up to talk about the fact that we need to understand these differences that we have when it comes to desire and responding and how we initiate and walk into sex and experience sex, because without that, we're not actually being seen and known and soothed. Like we're not actually able to engage. So you talked about in our last episode how men often enter through the physical door into the sexual relationship and into the intimacy, and women enter in more through the emotional door.
Yeah, and I want to clarify, because one of the things that is 20% of the time, the woman's sex drive is higher than the man's. And all that means is you're following that 20%. There is nothing abnormal or weird or strange about that. Okay. I think because of all the jokes and the caricatures, and it is more common for the man's sex drive to be higher than the woman's 80% of the time. I think sometimes couples, when it's reversed, that can feel like, what's wrong with us, or what, that's weird, and then that adds even more so to that shame and the tendency to not ask for help or to not clarify that. The point is,
both the man and the woman could feel like something was wrong with them.
Yes. Right. So the point is that God made us very different as men and women. And in this area of sexuality, we are very different. And I don't know any couples, I've never met couples, and I've been doing this for over 40 years, who have the same sex drives. And so the point being, we have to navigate and negotiate those differences. And I have to care. In our case, we're more typical. Your sex drive is higher than mine. And so we have to navigate and negotiate that. And it's very easy to slide into those, oh my gosh, you're back again kind of places.
No, your language is, you've got to be kidding. Actually,
or the you've got to be kidding. And you're like, it's been 4 days. I mean, it's been 48 hours. Like,
well, another place for us is like, if you're under stress, the last thing that's on your mind or interest or emotions or body is to be sexually. And when I'm not under stress, I'm very much desirous of sex, but under stress, I'm also very desirous of sex.
It doesn't seem to change for you in our circumstances.
Yeah, but that difference of understanding stress of actually, and for me, Teresa, this brings us really practical. For me to stop for a moment and think about what maybe your day was like and what you're actually experiencing, and to be attentive to that and think about that as a part of how I think about us making love together and being together is a part of how that intimacy gets built and how you feel seen and how you feel known and cared for. That has a lot to do with the level of like emotional engagement that that's available and you're bringing to the relationship.
Well, that is where the breakdown often occurs, and we begin to feel isolated, is in those differences and negotiating. If I don't believe that you are thinking about my day or how hard it's been that day with the kids, or how I've come home and said how stressed I was related to something at work, and then you initiate sex, I'm like, did you even hear me? Like, what are we, like, I feel unseen. Mm-hmm. I feel like all you care about is your own desire. Right. And that immediately sets us up not to be I don't feel like you're a teammate in that moment. I feel like you're an opponent or someone I've got to manage instead of a partner. Right. And the same thing can be true for you. If, gosh, I think back to when we had little kids and we had a really sick kid for a number of months early. And I think about like, your sex drive didn't go away just because I was nursing a baby. Right. We had a sick baby, all the things going on. And I needed to communicate that I cared about that and that it mattered to me, even if I couldn't meet that need. Right. And I don't think I did a good job of that in that season. Like, I think that, I was kind of like, I'm coming up for air every now and then. I honestly didn't think about your needs because I was like, you're the other grown up in the house. So like, you're on your own, buddy. Right. And I think that really created some wounds in our marriage.
Because we're not regarding one another in that place.
Exactly.
And so that's not the only difference, is that like the physical emotional, there's also assertive desire and receptive desire. That's a part of relationships.
That was probably one of the best gifts that ever came from my sex therapy program, was understanding the desire differences in men and women. Because we think of desire as traditional as assertive desire, which is I'm feeling sexual arousal or interest and I initiate with you. And that men and women can have assertive desire. That is normal. And to varying degrees, men are mostly associated with that assertive desire as the chief way that, in other words, their sex drive is pretty high and they are initiating or communicating that. But women also can have a strong sex drive, and it comes out of a physical desire that we initiate sex. And I think men want to be initiated with. I think that's a really important thing too. I think women sometimes put all of the responsibility for initiating sex onto their the higher desire partner, and I don't think that is fair because everybody wants to be initiated with. But there is a kind of desire that's called assertive desire, and that is where I'm not thinking about sex. I'm not necessarily in the mood for sex, but if you approach me, I'm like, sure. When we do a seminar, one of the things I do is I'll bring a bag of chocolate, good chocolate, because really good chocolate's important to me. But I bring a bag of chocolates, and I will go, hey, who wants, in the middle, kind of spontaneous, like who wants chocolate? And most people want chocolate. And I even bring milk chocolate and dark chocolate because people have preferences about the kind of chocolate they have. And then we talk about who was thinking about chocolate before I mentioned that. And there's always one or two that's like, yeah, I was thinking about chocolate before you said. But the point being, that's kind of receptive desire. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't necessarily craving chocolate. But when you bring it up, I'd love some, right? That's assertive desire. And that's more typically female in nature. And so I think that's an important thing, because if we don't understand that that is a valid form of desire as well, then sometimes, especially men, get their feelings hurt and feel like she never initiates. She never, and it's important, again, to know that everybody wants to be pursued and initiated with.
Right.
But that receptivity is a more typical female response to desire.
Right. And you also talked about competing values in the sexual relationship of safety and adventure and dependence and independence. So help us understand a little bit more, because what we're trying to do here is build a bit of a language and a perspective on understanding, hey, there's a lot of tension here. And we don't mean that in a negative sense, but there's a lot of differences. There's a lot of desire. There's a lot more happening beneath the surface than we realize of just, hey, do you want to have sex or not want to have sex?
Well, one of the things that there's a researcher by the name of Esther Perel, and she's the one who came up with this idea of adventure and safety being competing values in a marriage specifically. And one of the things, and she talks about the fact that both things are really important in a relationship, is, when we're enter into the covenant and we're in marriage, we're no longer in that place where we're not sure about. When we're dating, we're kind of still wooing our partner, as it were.
Right.
And I sometimes hear husbands say, I feel duped in my marriage because, we were having a hard time keeping our clothes on or our hands off of each other when we were dating. And she was way into that. And now we're married and it's like all that went away. Well,
or the other side of a wife saying, he used to write me poems and letters and now he doesn't communicate anything to me. I mean, both things, right?
Yes. So that uncertainty in a relationship is a motivating factor. And that sometimes when we enter into the covenant of marriage, because we already have the security and safety, which we desperately want and need. We talked about that in terms of attachment, right? We want the security and safety of a committed covenantal relationship, but sometimes in the safety, we lose adventure. And adventure is what pulls us. And so it's important to still cultivate both things, that while we have security and safety in the relationship, that we also are cultivating some things outside of one another. I'm not talking about other relationships as in...
Right.
But I'm talking about having a life outside of each other, whether that is other interests, other hobbies.
Not isolating or separating, but living and bringing that back into the relationship.
Right, so that when you come together, you've got... One of the things that happened in COVID that was just a nightmare, we're all living under the same roof all day, every day together. And that we aren't bringing... It's like a stagnant pond. There's nothing new coming in. And, oh my heavens, the relational tension and conflict that resulted from that time was unbelievable, because we need some time apart to miss each other, to bring new things and what you learned or what you experienced to the other person. It brings some freshness to the relationship. And so talking together as a couple about how do we cultivate safe, seen, and soothed,
right?
And how do we also have some adventure both together, adventures together, playfulness and that sort of thing together, but then also have some separate areas of interest and learning and growth and relational energy that we then go experience and then bring back to share in the relationship. And so both things create a sense of independence from each other and then interdependence as we bring those things back together. That's really important for a healthy relationship.
Yeah, because then it's mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, all those things are happening. You have some women that you spend time with that are really feed your soul, bring life to you in ways that are not a part of me. I have guys a men's group I've been in for 15 years, very powerful relationships that I bring life to. And so we bring that
And
fullness.
You have your work, I have my work. And while we don't talk about the details of our work, we can still bring some things that we're learning or growing or experiencing together.
You have all that. You and I, we have busy lives and we go to the beach and it's just the two of us. And then all of a sudden, assertive, receptive, and playful adventure, secure, dependence, independence, physical door, emotional door, all of a sudden, like everything just works. I mean, it's just us and the beach, and it's just.
Well, that's vacation sex.
Vacation sex. There you go.
That's very different.
Now we get into a dance that we can get into where I don't feel like you're actually seeing and knowing, and I feel wounded, not soothed. I feel like we have different frequency. We have different ways of looking at things. I don't understand why you said that. You don't understand why I said this. You've got to be kidding. I was just wanting to be with you. You know, all the dance that we can get into. And so when that dance breaks down, part of that's understanding that there's more happening in the room than sex at that point, that there's actually the way that we've come together in our relationship. There's some woundedness there that's working its way out that needs to be addressed, and not just by trying to fix the sex issue or have vacation sex.
Well, and this can happen around any number of topics. It doesn't just have to be sex. Sex and money tend to be the two, I call them lightning rod areas of relationships, because they speak to some of our vulnerabilities and core vulnerabilities. And so that's where a lot of times the symptomology will show up. And so there's this idea that when we miss each other, when we caricature one another with those different, in other words, the differences we don't work through our differences. We don't take the risk to talk about how that hurt me. He obviously doesn't even think about me. I've already told him what a stressful day I've had, and he walks in the door, and as soon as I get the kids to bed, the first thing I want to do is go take a hot bath and relax for the night and be done. And you're initiating sex, and you're like, what the heck? And that can turn into World War III in a relationship. Right. And so,
not that, I mean, this is theoretical.
I'll be more honest. That's a real story. So the reality of that is that when we don't understand that there are these deeper identity pieces that are at work, or wounds that we brought into, if you don't know this about yourself, let me tell you, you came into your marriage with some junk. And there are wounds that you brought into your marriage. And here's the really bad news. Your partner is uniquely gifted to poke and expose those wound areas. I call that your imago wound, the image wound, that part of you that either the person or combination of people who wounded you then in your marriage are bringing that in and wanting your partner, not consciously, this isn't conscious stuff, this is unconscious stuff, to meet that need for you. And quickly when we get into those differences, it gets into that bigger, deeper wound. And it's like and how you know you're there is the overreaction. You know, I make a level 2 statement like, hey, would you like to have sex tonight? Actually, this would come the other way. Yeah. You say to me, hey, would you like to have sex tonight? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Do you know what kind of day I've had? Yeah, like, I can't believe like all of this. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then, and let's just talk about our dance. You're like, you know, all I did was, you want me to initiate, I'm initiating. Right. And so forget that. And you turtle up, and then I'm mad. And this is very common.
When I turtle
you
up,
turtle and I get bigger.
And then you feel abandonment, which is your whole
And
wound.
then, so we go, I get bigger, you go lower, and then I'm done. The steel wall goes up. And now we're both isolated and away from each other, right? And I know, because again, 40 years of working with people and us 40 plus years married, I know this is very common for couples. Right. And this is the thing under the thing that when we go to marriage seminars or we learn good communication skills are so important. Conflict resolution skills are so important.
Well, and let me say our next season will be about power in relationship, which is roles, conflict, communication. So we're not going to just leave you without addressing that. It's not in this, but sex is a place where this gets exposed. We start to see the identity issues that are happening. And if we understand, okay, this is about something more that needs to be addressed, it can help us be able to have the right conversations about our relationship sexually. And when the dance breaks down, to not get into the we, you, the caricatures, and all
when
the
we
energy.
start to get into that kind of language, if we can do nothing else, even if you don't know what's in the room, if you can just know that there's something else in the room,
Right.
it will help you to at least not do more damage to one another in those places, because those differences the differences, which is where we started with this whole thing, our differences will either teach us to work through and we become stronger, that conegdo idea that we're opposing forces that actually strengthen one another, or they will drive us further and further apart and isolate us from one another, and we will do more damage to one another.
And then we get in some potentially, if that extends long enough, now we're in some very dangerous places that are threatening to what can happen in the marriage through pornography, affairs, all kinds of things that can happen, or just the bitterness and the resentment or whatever that may be. So again, we're going to address that in another season more deeply, but we need to name it here. And so some of the things we want to do is just give some questions to be asking. But before we do, closing thoughts that you would have, Teresa, about these differences, these desires, this understanding that there is a vulnerability here, and we're not going to actually be able to deepen our sexual intimacy without being able to move into that vulnerability with one another, because this is a whole person relationship.
Well, the thing you're going to continue to hear me say over and over through this time, our times together, is the things that feel like a threat are actually an invitation to deeper levels of intimacy with yourself, with the Lord, and with one another. And that's the bigger story that that gets lost in the middle of our small stories of navigating and negotiating life together. And when we think it's just about us and it's just about this, whatever season or moment we're in, we can quickly lose hope, and we quickly feel threat. But when we begin to understand, oh, actually God's inviting me to grow up, to depend on him in ways that I wouldn't otherwise, then we can begin to kind of right our brains and get back in the game and work to find a path to partnership.
That's right. And that pathway brings the sexual intimacy and makes that possible in ways that fixing it, techniques, and all these behavioral things are just not going to make that happen. So here's some things to reflect on. What dance are you in? Are you in what's happening that you can identify? There's a negative dance. There's something more going on.
Or a positive one.
And what would it look like for you to move more toward your spouse this week around differences and desires and where you are in your journey sexually?
Just talking about how are we different? I mean, you know it. So identify that. How are we different? And how do those differences complement each other? And how do those differences create friction between the two of us?
Yeah. And if sexual desire isn't present or not present in one or the other, it's not a he problem or her problem. It's a we. We're going to have to address this and work through this together. In our next episode, what we want to talk about is understanding a little bit more about brakes and accelerators, things that make it possible things that shut desire down and things that actually open desire up. So we're going to get a little bit more practical coming off of each episode. It's a little bit more practical and more specific. But as we close out this particular episode, I wrote these thoughts. Sex is powerful. A lot is at stake. And that's why we need to move towards ourselves, towards Jesus, and towards one another, because God's desire is not shame or withdrawal, but redemption and healing and a deeper knowing and a deeper restoration and redemption. And that's the hope that we have, and why I think it's so accurate and so important that we remember what you said, Teresa. Whatever the challenges are, they're an invitation. And God's desire is not shame or withdrawal, but redemption and healing and that deeper knowing and that soothing that he longs for us to experience with him and with one another. And I'll conclude this episode, Teresa, by just thanking you for staying in this with me. We've been pretty honest here about our sexual intimacy is a challenge, and it's grown and it's wonderful. And But the things that we're talking about, accepting this invitation, has been the only way within which we've been able to move forward. And the only way that's happened is for you and I both to choose to move towards one another and towards Jesus with one another. So thank you for that. And I know that that's what we hope each person who listens or watches these episodes experiences over grace, truth, and time.